So it appears as Trump is pretty much, reportedly at least, hell-bent on reviving the First Amendment Defense Act, which was presented in 2015 by a representative from Utah named Mike Lee, which is basically a bill that grants immunity to a company that persecutes employees or potential employees of the company based solely on religious belief. Now, in the vast majority of the definition of religious-based persecution, especially in the hiring process for these companies, it mostly is being reported to being pertaining to the LGBT community. It will grant the company an excuse to not hire someone based on their sexual orientation because of their religious beliefs. And the federal government is trying to remove all accountability of this happening. Now, I personally don't think we need to minimize the damage that such a legislation such as this would actually have on American society if it passes, if it's given the executive order by Mr. Trump, particularly because from the way that the First Amendment Defense Act is written, it aims to objectively remove any sort of provision for employers to have any incentive to hire or to keep employees of any recorded minority that offends their so-called precious religious beliefs. This is more or less the reality of the bill. Its priority is to combat homosexuality from being in the workplace. But we shouldn't minimize the damage that this bill would do. Not to say that the LGBT community is a minor damage collateral group, because they're not. I'm just saying that they're not going to be the only ones who will be affected by this. They're not going to be the only minority group that's going to be affected by this. They're the priority minority group, no doubt. But people such as myself, for example, could also be affected by this legislation should the companies that we work for choose to comply. It is under this particular fear and potential catastrophe that anybody that is in the recorded minority, that is, and when I say recorded minority, I mean a group that is looked upon as inferior to those who are looked at as a majority. When it comes to America, majority is either Caucasian citizens or Christian citizens. So you have basically two counterparts that are controlling what the workforce, who the workforce can hire, granting immunity to those who engage in persecutive discrimination, Caucasian Americans and Christian Americans. Those two groups have a lot of enemies, which this particular legislation is aimed at. For the Caucasian Americans, it is Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Mexicans. For the Christian Americans, it is the LGBT community, the Islamic community, the Jewish community, Satanist community, and the atheist community. So, between those two majority groups, you have pretty much 10 groups, essentially 10 groups of recorded minority as enemies. The irony in all this is, when it comes to the Caucasian American group and their enemies can also be in the same group as the Christian American groups. And the ultimate irony is a lot of the races you would find in the Caucasian American enemy line would also be in the Christian American enemy line. So it's a tangled web. Because of equal opportunity, we've been able to have companies exercise non-discriminatory policies when it comes to the hiring process. That doesn't mean that there aren't any loopholes, such as at-will employment, for example. But if the First Amendment Defense Act actually passes, is given the executive order to become law, what is going to happen with equal opportunity? I wonder. How is the First Amendment Defense Act going to compete with at-will employment, for example? At-will employment is already flawed enough as it is. And this is just going to influence it. It's just going to instigate it pretty much beyond its already compound and horrific, hazardous nature. We cannot take this sitting down. And I say this to not only my fellow non-believers, I say this to the LGBT community. I say this to the Mexican community. I say this to the Muslim community, to the Satanist community, to the African American community, to all the groups that I mentioned. We have to work together to combat this legislation, whether it passes or not. Whether it passes or not, it's in the minds of the people who govern this country. It is in the minds of people where the policy of the United States government is to be secular, and this violates secularism. So what we need to do, for all of us who have a job, whether it's a manufacturing job, whether it's at a fast food job, any job, we need to put our employers on the fence. We need our employers to stand up and talk about this with not only just us, but with everybody. So I want to assign all of you who have jobs, or those who know you have jobs, I want to assign the responsibility on you and myself for us to engage in our human resources associates, even the CEO if we have to. Depending on where you are, the CEO might be quite accessible. The CEO where I work is actually pretty accessible, surprisingly. So, I want to assign us all to engage in not only conversation about the First Amendment Defense Act with our employers, but to also force our hand onto our employers to assure that they will stand in opposition to the First Amendment Defense Act as a replacement to equal opportunity. Because let's face it, equal opportunity will die if this passes, if this is given the executive order. It will just die, because this contradicts equal opportunity as much as it contradicts secularism. Engage in conversation with our employers to voice opposition to this act as not only a replacement to the Equal Opportunity Act, but also an opposition to that is just plain wrong. And also to verbally, whether it's in a mass written statement or whether it's in a company meeting, have our employers tell all of us that they are with us for all the work, for all the time, for all the sweats, for all the blood we spilled, for them to make profits that we will never see, ever. They owe us that much. They owe us the support. They owe us that much support. They owe us enough support to say that equal opportunity is going to be here to stay at this company, and so will you. If this is given an executive order, we will be the first to say you are safe here, and your friends would be safe here should they happen to fill out an application. And if we get enough employers to do this, for them to send a message to Washington and to all across the country, companies that would actually stand in support of this legislation, this executive order, we might pull out a feasible and credible victory. If not for moral reasons, because this administration is going to be a hell ride for the next 4 years. So please, all of you who have jobs and are worried about FADA becoming a reality, in the near future, because it just might. All of you who have jobs and are scared shitless about this affecting your position in the company, I have every intention of putting my employer on the spot. I've done it before. Go to either your HR associate or try everything you can to either speak one-on-one with your CEO or send them a written statement, whatever, asking them to speak in opposition to this legislation, this executive order, and to speak with you, for you, and about you, that they support your position in the company, that they want you to stay, and that they will not allow this to replace equal opportunity. Not now or in the future. We've given our employers everything. It's time they give something back. And all we're asking for is time and assurance. I think they can afford that.